Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Langer. So glad you could join us today. And joining me today is someone I've been really eager to talk with. His name is Congressman Michael Cloud. He is the congressman from the 27th Congressional District of Texas. It's an area that I've actually been down to. In fact, before we sort of get into this, I wanted to ask you, are you a thin sliced jerky or a thick sliced jerky guy? I made a visit to Prosek's Smokehouse 7 years ago, which was an experience, but please.
Oh, they have some great jerky from, all different kinds even. Of course, they have the beef and peppered and non-peppered and turkey and not. And yeah, it's definitely a place to stop by when you're driving through.
This is the thing now, right? Which is first of all, jerky is making a renaissance in America. This is not going to be a jerky podcast, by the way, I promise you. But because you have, but the whole truck stop culture, side of the road culture is growing. Congressman and then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, I was chatting with him earlier. He wanted me to ask you, and I'm going to ask you about Buc-ee's.
Yeah.
So talk about the Buc-ee's phenomenon, because it is a big thing.
It's kind of a Texas thing.
Yeah.
They realize that people like clean restrooms when they're traveling. And
Shocking.
if you've ever been to Texas, there's miles and miles and miles of ranches and farmland and in between cities and everything. And so, you'll come by and they'll have like 50 gas pumps and a lot of fun little shopping stuff.
The one on the on 95 in near Florence, South Carolina, has got more than 100 pumps.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is,
a bit of an experience.
You can get your Texas style brisket there, which is also having a renaissance now. Everybody's making, which is driving the price of it. If brisket prices weren't already going up, that's helping to drive up the price of brisket as well. How do you rate the Buc-ee's, or do you have a brisket place near home that you
Oh
prefer?
gosh, barbecue in our district, that's like one of the most political things. That's like worse than picking Texas UT or A&M unless you've been to one of the two.
Of course.
What's your favorite barbecue place? And a lot of good barbecue places.
And that's the great thing, right? Because in the end, the more it's funny because there's an economist named Tyler Cowen who's over at George Mason. And he talks about the phenomenon of how when you get greater competition and you have more kinds of restaurants in a particular area, everybody has to up their game. And I'm sure in the 27th it's like that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and some of these places are like generations been in the family, and so it's really great. Many of the places you get to stop by.
We're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of your outside interests and hobbies and things like that. And I know you're a family man. We're going to talk about that a little bit towards the end, so people can get to know you a little more. But you've now, what is this? This is your second full term in office, right?
Yeah, finishing up second full term.
Okay.
Yeah,
and
6 months of the majority.
So let me sort of let's pull back a little bit and let's talk about this. Starting with, how has your perception of the job changed from when you were running for office and originally seeking? What did you think then versus what you know now?
Oh gosh. We made a video kind of to announce our run, and that was a whole, I was never wanted this as a career.
Okay.
Totally grassroots, was asked to run, with us and our family, initially said no. We prayed about it, felt like it was something we were supposed to do. It's kind of like you talk about helping the country all the time, doing what we need to do. And so, but one of the first lines we said was Washington was broken. And then you get here and find out, we were right. Yeah, we're right. And it's just uncovering the ways of dysfunction, and sadly now it's even corruption, and how many things are really gamed against the American people is really devastating for a country that's so steeped in a wonderful ethic in its inception. Not perfect, but I mean the ideals that we were aspiring to were just amazing, and
go ahead.
To see how far not the populace, but a lot of the politics up here in D.C.
Yeah. It's funny because I was going to come back to this later on, because I know you. Not that we need to get into the letter you sent to the IRS back in August quite yet, but there's something I talk about in other venues, which is there's a author named Henry Silverglade who wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day. And he surmises this idea that the average American commits 3 felonies a day, or at the very least, has the opportunity. And most importantly, what it leads to is this idea that if the feds want to get you, they can find something to get you with. And I think we're seeing more of that. I think we would agree with that.
Well, and it's this transition from this idea of that the government is meant to serve the people versus, and the thing that set us apart as a nation, I talk about the American Revolution and the fact that the glory of the American Revolution wasn't a new government, it was a free people.
Sure.
And the free people realized in order to maintain a healthy society, you have to have some structure of government. Right. So let's create a government, let's put restraints on it that keep it in check and keep us away from the abuses that we've seen throughout history. And that was the model. And, we've drifted a bit from that over time.
Let's come back to the thing that we were talking about. So the Congressman and I were talking about this before we went on camera, because I live, as many of you know, in Williamsburg, Virginia, and you spent some time in that neck of the woods as a child. Now, I know for me, so I came of age, I'll say my age, I turned 5 in 1976. So I just in time for the bicentennial, and just when my brain could really, like a sponge, absorb all those things. And I went to Colonial Williamsburg when I was 6 and 7 years old, and got to literally play in that area of the Revolution. You were down there around that same age. Did that have any impact on your development, your formation of these kinds of ideas?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. You can point to a lot of signals throughout your life. Obviously, my parents, pro-American people. Not really politically involved. I don't remember. They would vote, be involved, but I don't remember a political sign in my yard or campaigning or those kind of things. Loved our country. My dad built submarines, and so we were in the shadow of military bases. Grandparents, veterans, and just I was coming of age, I guess, when not coming of age, but I was born in 75, so 5 years old. Reagan becomes president. Very optimistic vision for the future of America and what we can become. So you look at these things around it. I even, my first Sunday school teacher back then, a lot of times they would dress up in some sort of character. Mine was Uncle Sam. Sure, and so all these little things throughout history it was just I'm sure served as little guideposts along the way from. So
it's funny because obviously now living in Williamsburg, Virginia, I'm watching sort of the politics and modern politics creep into what the programming there. Not that I want to carp about CW, but we're seeing it more generally in the folks who want to tear at American history. And tear at the legacy of Thomas Jefferson, even tear at the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. A colleague of mine, Quinn Hilliard, just had a piece up about the efforts to undo the legacy of James Madison at his home on Peelier. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this as someone who cares deeply about this country. Where do you see this leading us to?
It's kind of a dangerous place in the thing because we're all flawed. And that's kind of a Judeo-Christian in Scripture. We've all sinned at some point, and we never celebrated these people because we were perfect. We celebrated them because in spite of, we've overcome. And that's the case of anyone who does anything great. It's you've overcome whatever the things were to accomplish.
The preamble to the Constitution is an aspirational sentiment in order to form a more perfect union.
Exactly, and something we're continuing to work toward every single generation. And so you have to, in the context of their time, they took a huge leap forward in presenting these ideas, this idea that rights were embedded in people, and that they were a gift from God, and that government was put there to protect those rights, as opposed to being a grant from a benevolent governor or government or king or monarch or something along those lines, and so it was an amazing thought and an idea, and this experiment in liberty, like they would call it, understanding. It's kind of like doctors who they'll say they're practicing, and they've been practicing for 30 years in a sense. It's like it's something we have to continue to be vigilant
we are
with.
Practicing democracy. I like that. I appreciate that.
And so we have to be involved in the process.
And to go along with that sentiment, right? It's when we move away from practicing and being amateurs to becoming professionals. That's really the problem, isn't it?
In a sense, you have people who come to D.C. And then forget who we're working for, in a sense, and and we have a professional bureaucracy who now will outweight elected officials and the respect for what that's supposed to mean, and the office. Not that the office is any. I respect the office that I'm holding, recognizing they'll say, there's nothing more X than an ex-congressman, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I realize that one day I'm going to be there. As long as I'm here, I want to do everything I can to honor the responsibility that's been given us, and we need to see that out of our bureaucracy and these agencies that have, in large sense, gone rogue and kind of have a will on their own, and it doesn't matter really what happens in an election.
It's interesting because, to come back to some of the things we've been talking about, which is, it's a sentiment that I lay out, which is every time government is expanded, individual rights are diminished. You can't reconcile liberty with anti-liberty. And it goes along with, and that's sort of my area of my passion in terms of public policy is the regulatory state. But it circles us back to this idea of the 3 felonies a day. And when you expand the power of government, these individual rights get diminished. Talk about this in the context of any of the oversight work that you've been doing, the congressional committee work that you've been doing. You talk to agency heads or agency representatives. Talk about sort of their attitude towards all this.
Gosh, I remember so many hearings. We had somebody who had worked in the State Department, right? And this was during the Trump administration, and they were upset, and they were trying to produce this narrative like, okay, there's the Trump foreign policy, and then there's the official foreign policy.
Yes, that's right. There's the Trump foreign policy, and then there's the elitist foreign policy. The folks who know what we're doing.
And they would, well, that's not the official foreign policy of the United States. I remember asking...
Because the adult foreign policies led us to such a stable world right now. But go ahead.
I remember asking them in the committee here, and I was like, who sets the foreign policy in the United States? They're like, well, that's kind of a complicated question. It goes to this committee and that committee. I'm like, I really don't think it's a really complicated question. This is like one most elementary students can answer. And finally, it's like, well, the president, and it's, and it's one of those things where you can see if an agency doesn't like what an elected official, and this is a bipartisan issue.
Sure, of course.
It's like you're temporary, you're elected, we'll outweight you, and kind of continue, or we'll drag our feet if we don't like the policy, or and then there's a lot of, we can look at. One of the issues we've been dealing with lately is stock trades and members of Congress and those kind of things. And we should have scrutiny on elected officials doing that. But then you also have the bureaucracy who has no accountability whatsoever.
Right.
And they're making a lot of, you look in the last couple of years, like who's actually made a lot of these health decisions based on our country, or even some of our weapon systems and military systems. You want to make sure that they're making it for the best strategic interest, not because of a stock portfolio, or not because of, they get out of government work and then they get on a board at another company.
It's the concept of, like, on the regulatory side, they call it regulatory capture. It's political capture. I mean, it's the whole idea of, you get so entrenched in all of this, and you want to do right, and you want to have a job when you become an ex-member or ex-administration official. And this leads us down that road. Let's sort of circle back to the transparency and accountability part. One of the things the last administration did when they came into the administration was they announced a policy, an executive order on transparency and accountability in the regulatory agencies when it comes to administrative actions. The new administration comes in, they do away with that. And at the same time, they're working to grow the administrative state. Talk about the problems that ensue from there.
Oh, gosh. You end up having almost a different class, this bureaucracy that's not accountable to anyone. And there are a number of the proposals even coming up this week and the next, and those kind of things that are really meant to entrench the insurance bureaucracy are very, very troubling. And, we deal with casework in our office all the time. And trying to get answers sometimes for people. We spent the last 2 years, and I understand with COVID there were some issues with teleworking and everything like that, but then there's a point where the rest of America is back working again, and we can't get people in the VA to answer a phone call, or other agencies, or you had different offices who wouldn't work, and it's like you forget that you're working for these people.
That's exactly right.
And I think we should have a professional work environment. We should pay them what is reasonable for that type of work. But you've got to remember, when you're in public service, you're here to serve the public, and right now that paradigm's just completely backwards.
So there are agencies like the VA which are essentially involved in serving the public, right? That's their goal. Then you have agencies like the IRS, which is an inherently antagonistic kind of an agency. They've just gotten the go-ahead to hire 87,000 more employees. How many of them are enforcement?
Yeah.
You sent that. I have the letter here, but you sent the letter in August to the IRS asking for greater accountability. Let's start with talk about the letter, what it was about, and why you sent the letter. I mean, as if we had to discuss, but we should.
Right. Well, recently we had, obviously legislation with that it was included hiring 87,000 new employees, but we also found out the IRS has been accumulating firearms and ammunition, and you're thinking, and most of us are thinking,
a small nation.
Most of us are thinking, accountants and calculators and that kind of thing, and it's troubling. There was even a job posting that got taken down right as it went public.
I thought it was a joke. Well, I thought because now I fact check everything.
Oh yeah.
I thought that this is someone no, it wasn't photoshopped. Sorry, go ahead.
And to that point, I mean, right now we're in such a weird season. Like so many of the things we're dealing with 3 years ago, we would have thought was satire.
Right. That's exactly right.
And we could go down that, and sadly, it's getting a longer list where it's like, this isn't a meme. This is actually what...
This is not the Babylon Bee. This is really what's going on.
Yes. Literally, we've had things, press releases we've sent to media at times. They've called us back thinking it is the Babylon Bee. But unfortunately, so you have an ad by the IRS saying, okay, we're looking for new IRS agents. Among all the skills you need to be able to...
Proficient with firearms.
is to be proficient with a firearm and be willing to shoot to kill if necessary. And I can tell you, I've traveled the district, I've traveled the nation a bit. I've yet had one person come to me and say, of the problems really facing our nation, if we just had a few more IRS agents, I think that's going to help us out.
And the other side has pushed back and said, well, we need these agents to go after the big time tax cheats, right? We need to be able to get the billionaires who are cheating on their taxes. Yeah. But then this video surfaced a couple of days later. I don't remember who pulled it out, but it was a video that surfaced showing the training, and it was folks going after a small lawn operator, right? That was the scenario, the training scenario. You have a small lawn service business, landscaping business. The guy bought a truck. He may have improperly accounted for the truck or improperly paid for the truck. And they went the full bore. You and I both know, or at least I don't want to put words in the mouth, but I think you would agree with me that this is really what it's about. It's not about going after the big cheats. Those folks have lawyers. They're going to be able they'll find ways around the law. It's about going after the little guys in the 27th Congressional District of Texas.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't that long ago that we saw the IRS politically motivated. Yeah. And there was really no accountability for that. And when there's no accountability, it only emboldens the wrongdoer.
It actually goes the other way, right? It was not only that there was no accountability. Like it used to be that folks who were caught with their hand in the cookie jar would get fired, they would get punished, and there would be policies written to make sure they couldn't do it again. Yeah. The Obama administration doubled down. They promoted the people who were involved, and they doubled down and tried to get the policy enshrined in law. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and so it wasn't that long ago we saw that happen, and so now we're going to hire a new army of IRS agents, give them authority to potentially shoot and kill, and we're collecting ammo, buying firearms for IRS agents, and then, most people doing their taxes, if you call the IRS agent and you're trying to figure out how to do your taxes, you're a small business owner who might know landscaping, you're not an accountant, you're not, you're doing the best you can to try to figure out this and all the other state regs you also have to deal with and what have you. So, this already becomes a burden just in not even the tax bill, but in the time it takes to figure it out. And so you call the IRS. If and when you get through, you get an answer on what it's supposed to be. If you were to call back and if and when you got through again, it would probably be a different answer.
And there's no guarantee that whatever answer is the correct one. You can't rely on that as a defense.
Right. So we're instead of going to train them to actually know the tax law, and serve, so it's one of those things where what we need to be doing is not putting extra scrutiny on the American people who are doing their best. We need to be putting extra scrutiny on the bureaucracy and getting them up to par. Yeah. During
the George W. Bush administration, there was an effort at OSHA. And there was a perspective taken OSHA, and obviously the folks who they are adherents to the idea that OSHA is an antagonistic agency. They hated this, but the idea was it was called OSHCON, And OSHA would come in, and they would do an inspection, and they would give you a certificate. If you passed the inspection, you got a certification. If you didn't, they would give you time, and then you come back and fix it. They'd give you a certification that you can then take to your workman's comp insurance provider, and you can get a break on your workman's comp insurance. And it was a great sort of collegial relationship as opposed to adversarial relationship. Let me shift gears here and talk about the issue of transparency and accountability. Because it's not just the IRS, but other areas as well. The FBI, Ken Starr just passed away. Ken Starr was a great Texas connection. He was chancellor at Baylor. I had the opportunity to talk to Ken Starr back in 2018, and he said then the FBI needed greater transparency and accountability. But here we are today. We're finding out that, in fact, one of the people in the employ who created the Steele dossier was being paid by the FBI. Something needs to change, doesn't it?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Okay, we had FISA warrant abuse, and we had the FBI continually now very overtly targeting political opponents. And the key issue comes back to nobody trusts the FBI now,
Yes.
and so even if what they're saying is true, their credibility is shot.
Right.
And who do you go to when the law enforcement branch has been corrupted?
Yeah.
And that becomes very troubling. And we have to remember that our whole foundation of our government is the trust of the American people. And when we lose trust, which we certainly have, it becomes very troubling to deal with. And this is all about, our issue, the work that we're trying to do with the bureaucracy from an oversight perspective. But, what needs to be done with the FBI is really all about just simply restoring the people's trust in their government. But again, I mean, if you talk about a rogue agency who's forgotten who they serve,
That's right.
The FBI is a prime example of that.
So speaking of this issue of losing sight of things and talking about things and restoring trust, Vice President of the United States goes on the Sunday talk shows, says the border is secure. Now, I don't remember if the 27th is on the border. If not, it's right close to the border.
Yeah, pretty close.
But talk a little bit about the immigration issue, the impact on Texas, and the mayors in Democratic sanctuary cities finally recognizing that maybe they shouldn't be calling for being sanctuary cities anymore.
Yeah, the southern end of our district is 2 hours south of the southern border.
Okay.
And my wife is also a naturalized citizen from Mexico, so we have a little bit of experience going through the immigration process. And I think it's important to recognize that immigration is different than border security.
100%.
Obviously, they're related. Border security is something that should not be a partisan issue. I mean, we have militarized cartels on the southern border that control everything that's coming across.
Right.
And so we've, by now, anybody who's been following this understand the human trafficking issue that's horrific, that's propelled by the cartels. There's fentanyl pouring across our border with, along with, all the other illicit drugs. And we're talking 100,000 people killed in our country. A lot of these chemicals coming from China. Yeah. They're paying the cartels to distribute them into the United States. How that is not considered an act of war, I don't know. And so, our entire border, there is not operational control. And so just in my time being here, you've gone from the unarmed coyote, and that's what they call the cartel members who are on the border, right, bringing people across. So they'll kind of be ducking and weaving, waiting for our guys or gals on the border to kind of clear their post to sneak people across the border.
Sure.
That's where it was a few years ago, which was bad enough. Now it's the armed coyote coming across telling our guys, hey, I'm going to be bringing over a load. Can you get them to the station for processing?
Wow.
In which case then our taxpayer dollars are used to transport them all over the country, in which case the cartels many times take up the rest of that relationship because either they still owe the cartel money and so they're going to go into some sort of work program where they're still beholden to the cartels, or they're in some sort of sex trafficking or trade. And the cartels are profiting millions, hundreds of $millions a month off of this. And that's just that. That's the illegitimate kind of, from an ag perspective even, just to give you an example of how this completely affects, a lot of times calves will be born in Mexico. They'll come into the United States to a feed yard, get all grow up basically, and then eventually make their way to market. The ag worker who's bringing cows from Mexico to the U.S. is also paying the cartels to come across, and so it's not just the illicit activity. It's like the cartels control the southern side of the border, and yet we have a border czar who says, "Oh, we have operational control." We do not have operational control at all, and thankfully our governor started shipping or busing some people to different cities, who had called themselves sanctuary cities. Right. And, for all the moralizing they've done against Texas and those kind of things, the truth is they want a buffer between their community and backyard and the border as well. They just want that buffer to be Texas. Texas and Arizona. Texas and Arizona. So we realize that we're right there, and so we need infrastructure on the border. But, it's just... I've completely incentivizing the wrong behavior.
I've been down to the border in Arizona for a whole another, not an immigration issue, and I watched people cross the border illegally, and it's a scary process to say the worst, scary prospect, I should say, to say the least. Let me shift gears because I know we're running short on time here. So one of the things I like to talk about is I want people to get to know the folks that I'm interviewing. Like, we can talk politics, we can talk policy, really policy more than anything else. We were talking about jerky. I asked you about jerky earlier. I had originally conceived of this idea of doing a whole podcast called Outside Interest, in which we talk to folks who do politics and policy in D.C. about the stuff that they do that is completely unrelated to work. Talk about this. I mean, before you were a member of Congress, you had hobbies, or maybe you were spending all of your time with your family. I know you have 3 kids?
Yeah, 3 kids.
How old are they?
They are now 16, 13, and 12.
There you go. I'm now an empty nester, so it's
fun age.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
But talk about. Do you have? I mean, I know now all of your time is taken up, but at least beforehand, what was kind of what were your hobbies? What did you do outside of work?
Oh gosh, earlier on, the kids were young. I guess I remember when we got started. It was only 4 years ago, but we had 3 young kids, and now they're all preteen.
Sure.
Involved, so now whatever fun time we get, it's usually
kid oriented. I get it.
Cross country meet, football meet, football game.
You ran,
something
right?
Going
You
on.
were a cross country runner?
I was track, cross country. Ran in college, used to be fast. Now I'm just trying to stay ahead of my.
It doesn't look
my
like
8th grade daughter.
I was a 400 meter runner. I was a quarter miler. Yeah, I can't tell anymore today. But I'm sorry. So kid stuff. But you guys like to travel.
We do enjoy traveling. Certainly as a family when we can. Before that, I was really involved in our church. I worked on the staff as a church, but then just being involved in the community. I mean, Texas is a great place to get out and do a bunch of stuff.
That's right.
Outdoors, outdoorsy as well, and whether you go to a firing range and practice
some targets,
some target, shooting or there's fishing and hunting and all those different kind of things.
So if I'm going to travel to Texas now, and I say this as someone who we spent a lot of time in Central Texas. My wife had family in San Antonio, so we spent a lot of time in the Hill Country. We once did a vacation that was a tour of Texas Hill Country swimming holes, which I got to tell you, I can't recommend that enough. I mean, it was a great week. Every day, 1 or 2 different swimming holes: the Blanco River, the Guadalupe River, the Colma. Anyway, great stuff. If I were to come down to the 27th, where would you tell me to go? What are like the top 3 things that I would have to go see down on the 27th?
We have a great coastline. And that's almost.
Is Corpus in the 27th, or is it next to it? Okay.
Corpus is in Corpus and Oasis County, the entire district, and so Corpus has some very neat attractions. We got the Lexington.
Sure.
So that's cool. Been able to take the kids there and see the history of it, and right basically across the channel from that is the aquarium.
Oh yeah.
That's there, Texas State Aquarium. Another amazing asset that's very family friendly, but you can go up the beaches and it's kind of funny because each beach has its own little characteristics. So there were some that were great when my kids were younger, and you can almost go out a half mile and the water's still up to your waist, and then there's others where you get some waves now that they're a little older, can kind of handle those things, and so that's a lot of fun, and then a lot of the rural communities, there's just these neat from old theaters to small town
Sure.
to those barbecue spots that we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's a really.
You live in Victoria.
I live in Victoria.
And that they have one of the amazing things in Texas is that every county has this amazing historic courthouse. Basically, You guys still have yours, right?
Yes, and it is beautiful. They did a remodeling. It might have been 20 years, but
Sure.
10. But still, it's neat to go see it and see the history of it all. A lot of history throughout that whole region. Yeah, the courthouse tour is a pretty neat tour.
How much coastline does Texas? How much coastline does Texas have? Do you know?
I should know that,
I know,
right? But yeah, it slips my mind. It slips my mind as well.
It's like you should never do math on the air. It never asks a question you already know the answer to. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, it's a good bit. That much I know. Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. So, listen, Congressman, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's been good to be here.
This is, of course, Congressman Michael Cloud from the 27th Congressional District of Texas. I'm Andrew Langer. Thank you so very much for tuning in. See you next week.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.